So yes, there was Rules of the Game, and then after Rules of the Game, of course, is Coppola's The Godfather. We've talked about that before on this channel. Fellini's 8.5, that's just been uploaded. Sunrise: A Song of Two Humans by Murnau, we've discussed that. As we have Jean Ford's The Searchers, Kurosawa's Seven Samurai. Look, I'm not the biggest fan in this world, and it's on me, it's not on the film. I'm not a Singing in the Rain guy. I don't know if it's just because I'm not an American, not a fan of musicals, but that has nothing to do with the film. It's me and my preferences are elsewhere. Frankly, I'm not gonna, compared to some other films, though not very many at all, that we arrive at on this list. It's not one of these films where I think it is necessarily overrated. I get the appeal. I think where it's rated is fine. I'm just not going to vote for it personally. Which brings us to Jeanne Dielman, 23, Quai du Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles. Now, this is a very important film, very, very influential upon the film discourse at large. Chantal Akerman, perhaps the go-to name drop for the title of apotheosis of feminist filmmaking, though she herself seemed to take some issue with that term. My 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die has this to say. One of the key works of feminist filmmaking, not to mention one of the most important European films of the 1970s, Belgian director Chantal Akerman's minimalist masterwork, Jeanne Dielman, is admittedly demanding viewing, and this undoubtedly contributes to the film's marginalized status 3 decades later. Now, this text was published in 2011, just to be clear. There hadn't been certain developments yet. It isn't available on home video, and even repertory screenings are now rare. The film offers a view of bourgeois ennui so spare and bleak that it makes L'Aventura 1960 look like a Frank Tashlin picture. With a degree of aesthetic rigour unusual even within that era's European auto cinema, Jeanne Dielman is a 3-hour documentation of alienation, and the methodical precision of Akerman's approach inarguably defeats all but the most patient of filmgoers. As you can see in this film here, I've tried to make it more appealing to the TikTok generation, as well, outside of those weirdo, so I've heard, trad wife types who don't seem to have gotten the film whatsoever, apparently. Shame. Anyway, the film chronicles 3 days in the life of its eponymous protagonist, a widowed house homemaker who supports the comfortable existence she shares with her adolescent son through occasional prostitution. The bulk of the picture simply observes Jeanne, Delphine Seyrig, in the minutiae of her daily life. Using static long shots, Akerman allows the monotonous domestic tasks to unfold in real time. However, the film is largely a bravura conceptual exercise, ultimately defined by its 2 final shots. Spoilers here, everyone. It concludes as Jeanne, after servicing one of her clients, calmly stabs him to death with a pair of scissors. Then she sits serenely alone in the darkness of the family dining room. Whereas the writer-director's other films are similarly meditative and deliberate in their style of pacing, they are largely also mesmerizing and hypnotic experiments in narrative, readily engaging the viewer through both emotional and formalist means. This film, however, is arguably Akerman's coldest, most difficult and remote work, and many will be left wondering if the film's expansive running time was truly necessary to relate the slim character study. It's funny, just as an aside, my video on this film could redeem my so-so video on a film with a similar premise, Sohrab Saleh's 1976 film, Time of Maturity. Though I'm proud of my earlier video on Saleh's Utopia on, again, a similar topic, so I guess that cancels it out. Anyway, although the film is taxing, its rewards are considerable and often inexorably linked to the work's length. For one, Akerman's feminist thesis is conveyed with a cogent urgency as a result of her decision to depict Jeanne's life in such unsparing detail. It is enough for Akerman to suggest the tedium of her protagonist's selfless existence, but rather by explicitly presenting the drab banality of her routine in real time, Akerman expertly conveys the stifling emptiness that ultimately drives Jeanne to her tragic final act. The film also triumphs as a study in performance. Seyrig's perfectly realised portrayal provides subtle glimpses into Jeanne's progressive psychological unravelling, with slight gradations of behaviour that would likely be imperceptible if contained within a film of more compact structure and traditional dramatic emphasis. By the time the viewer arrives at the 3-hour mark, the microscopic tightening of facial muscles and increased brusqueness of gesture that accompany the boiling of coffee or the overcooking of potatoes assume the heft of epic melodrama, maybe the kind of picture that's better to contemplate in theory rather than as a vehicle for viewing pleasure. But for the spectator attuned to Akerman's austere approach, her film remains, in many respects, an unforgettable achievement. Now I'm going to read out this essay written by Yvonne Margulies, which was published at least in August 2009, I believe for Criterion. Jeanne Dielman, 23, Quai du Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles, is Chantal Akerman's masterpiece, a mesmerising study of stasis and containment, time and domestic anxiety. Stretching its title, characters, daily household routine in long stark takes, Akerman's film simultaneously allows viewers to experience the materiality of cinema, its literal duration, and gives concrete meaning to a woman's work. We watch for 3 hours and 21 minutes as Jeanne cooks, takes a bath, has dinner with her adolescent son, shops for groceries, and looks for a missing button. Each gesture and sound becomes imprinted in our minds, and as we are lulled by familiar rhythms and expected behaviour, we become complicit with Jeanne's desire for order. The perfect parity between Jeanne's predictable schedule and Akerman's minimalist precision deflects our attention from the fleeting signs of Jeanne's afternoon prostitution, but nevertheless loom at the edge of our mind, gradually building unease. Jeanne Dielman constitutes a radical experiment with being undramatic, and paradoxically with the absolute necessity of drama. Made in 1975, when the artist was only 25 years old, the film upped the ante on neorealism's mandate of social attention. Akerman's real-time matter-of-fact presentation of a woman's everyday seemed to mock the timidity of the neorealist demand for a 90-minute film showing the life of a man to whom nothing happens. In post-war film and video, banal kitchen scenes in Umberto D, 2 or 3 Things I Know About Her, Semiotics of the Kitchen, are signs of an inclusive realism, a new politicized energy. Akerman's images between images, those scenes neglected in conventional representation, gave this impulse a strong feminist accent. But more than a corrective to traditional cinema, Jeanne Dielman is a lesson in structural economy. The full visibility given to daily tasks exacts, as its cost, the more sensational scenes of Jeanne's prostitution. These encounters last the time it takes to cook dinner. Akerman told an interviewer that one night, after having worked on her script for some time, she saw the entire film in its final form. She then decided to eliminate subplots and subsidiary characters, focusing intensely on Jeanne in her apartment. Aunt Fernande, Jeanne's sister, living in Canada, only appears in the form of a letter, read in litany-like monotone by Jeanne to her son. The neighbour, heard by the door and played by Akerman herself, describes how, shopping for her husband's dinner and still undecided, she ended up getting the same expensive cut of meat as the person in front of her online. Never casual, each of the film's uniquely strange and long-winded monologues expresses some form of gendered pressure. They refer to Jeanne's marriage, the son's Oedipal thoughts, each breathing a sexual anxiety, each a drawn-out wordy attempt to mitigate the other scene we never see, the elided afternoon trysts. These were impressively mature themes and stylistic strategies for such a young director, and it was not the first time she had worked with them. The entropic contamination of domesticity and tragedy, order and disorder, was a central Akerman idea from her very first film, Saut Marville, 1968, in which a deadpan 18-year-old Akerman herself performs in an entire kitchen space, cleaning, making a mess, cooking, sealing the door and window, a compressed, chaotic Jeanne Dielman, and a precocious, explosive debut. Born in Belgium in 1950 of Jewish parents who left Poland to escape Nazism, Akerman was an autodidact who quickly abandoned film school and worked selling diamond shares on the Antwerp Stock Exchange to raise money to make Saut Marville. New York, where she lived from 1971 to 1972, was a formative experience. She frequented anthology film archives, was exposed to minimalist dance, Andy Warhol's long-duration films, John Zemeckis' diary films, and other structural filmmakers. She has mentioned being particularly impressed with Michael Snow's La Region Centrale, a film whose random camera movements over a humanless landscape opened my mind to the relationship between film and your body, time as the most important thing in film. In 1972, while in New York, she initiated her long collaboration with the brilliant cinematographer Babette Mangolte, with whom she made La Chambre 1972, Hotel Monterey 1972, Hanging Out Yonkers 1973, News from Home 1977. In these films, Akerman's fixed camera provokes unexpected performances. In La Chambre, the camera makes a 360-degree pan around a small studio, meeting with equal interest a chair, a bed, Chantal eating an apple, rocking under the covers. Under the camera's long stare, even the empty corridor in Hotel Monterey starts to perform. It will be seen in depth as a corridor, or in foreground as a surface of lines and masses. A room with a door ajar lets us see a pregnant woman sitting, hinting at a story. What Akerman learned from Hotel Monterey was that the shot duration changes the equation between the concrete and the abstract, between drama and descriptive detail. Her narrative films apply the structuralist lesson, fashioning an expectation out of a series of real-time non-dramatic shots. In terms of performance, she is indebted to Bresson's flat models and Dreyer's non-psychological austerity. Her characters speak in recitative monologues intercut by long silences. Channeling the memory of chants heard at the synagogue into her modernist art, Akerman has said that what interests me in dialogue is that it rounds up with rhythm, a psalmody where the sentences don't make sense. Infused with her fondness for rituals, domestic, Jewish, her lines accrue meaning nevertheless. Akerman met her actress for Jeanne Dielman, Delphine Seyrig, the star of last year at Marienbad, Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie, and India Song in 1974 at the Nancy Theatre Festival, where Hotel Monterey was being shown. That same year she made J'ai tu il elle, a film that importantly precedes Jeanne Dielman's provocative crossing of the line between literal and acted scenes. Akerman boldly decided to appear in this film, using her own malaise to cut against what she felt was her over-rigid form. Closer to performance art than to cinema, her obsessive gestures corrode the lines between acting, living, and creating. The film ends with an explicit yet stylized sex scene between two women. Amplified sounds and high-definition images would become a trademark of Akerman's starkly presentational mise-en-scene. She shares with fellow 70s directors Fassbinder and Oshima a frontal-heightened approach to filming bodies. In Jeanne Dielman, the camera is fixed and low, matching the filmmaker's short height, and the frame composition is frontal and symmetrical. Akerman does not use close-ups, reverse angles, or point-of-view shots. She avoids cutting this woman in pieces and is never voyeuristic. She has explained, addressing the more feminist aspects of her project, "One always knows where I am." Mangold's precision recreation of light, traversing an apartment through the day, and Seyrig's contained portrayal complement the director's formal clarity. Almost classical in its construction, Jeanne Dielman works like a time bomb. The Flemish colour palette of Akerman's interiors, the linearity of the story, with the first, second, and third day intertitles, all work to associate her with the mild disjunctions of European art cinema, and yet the acuity and amplified concreteness of her images creates a visible instability. As the shot goes on, the viewer becomes aware of his/her own body, restless and then again interested. After reading the image of a woman washing dishes, one's attention starts to wander to tiles, to colours, to a rag. This perceptual oscillation adds to the film's pervasive disquiet. Jeanne's need for control, exemplified by her fixed schedule and menu, covers an anxious dread of autonomy with clear sexual undertones. In its structural delineation of a link between two prescribed female roles, domestic and sexual, the mother and the whore, the film engages broadly with a feminist problematic, one that takes into account also a woman's alienation, her labour, and her dormant violence. Jeanne's son, for instance, the only man in the house besides her clients, expects to be served and controls his mother. "You missed a button," he says at one point. And yet Akerman's unerring sensibility for behaviour pushes the film beyond a thesis-like statement. When Jeanne sits on the mustard armchair, not knowing how to fill up her time, the anxiety is palpable. She briefly touches her chest, her heart. She compulsively, thriftily turns off lights before leaving her room, and with this simple gesture she separates one domestic space from the other, kitchen from bedroom. It is with this delicate attention to detail in the restricted sphere of a woman's domain, the address announced in the title, that Akerman tells her tale about displaced sexuality. What is familiar and domestic, the film reveals is strange. In public appearances, the filmmaker has often discarded any direct equation of Jeanne's quotidian chores of a woman's repression under patriarchy, explaining that these were the loving gestures she was familiar with as she observed intently her mother and aunt making a bed, preparing food. Despite this statement, protective of her own familiar memories, in the film Akerman insists on a haunting contamination of scene by obscene. Halfway into the film, at the end of the second day, when we have become used to Jeanne's and Akerman's routine, something happens. Perhaps it is when Jeanne places the money that John gave her into the tureen and forgets to cover it with the lid. At any rate, some spectators might notice Jeanne's dishevelled hair, while others might notice, as she does, that the potatoes have overcooked. We see Jeanne from the kitchen as she appears by its door, and this first shift in the camera's habitual position announces the character's unravelling. One of the funniest choreographies ever of domestic terror, Jeanne carries the pot around the house, not knowing what to do with this evidence of mistiming. In a didactic exposure of the fragility of order, Akerman's frame remains the same when a fork falls, dishes remain unwashed, and a shoe brush drops. No cutaway or musical score highlights the disturbance. This intrusion of objects moving on their own gives plastic shape to the unwelcome, recurring thoughts that Jeanne, an obsessive-compulsive, attempts to suppress. Time is clearly the culprit. See the wonderful scene in which Jeanne's coffee tastes bad. She will try all possible remedies. She changes the milk and even caps the process of a ritual of symmetry, combining 2 lumps of sugar into a rectangle. She pours the coffee into the milliliter filter and waits. Still shaped like an irreversible hourglass, the filter will not correct what has gone wrong. Jeanne Dielman's double ending represents the link between containment and excess, between sexual repression and violence. With impeccable narrative logic, we see for the first time what has been kept off screen. After having an orgasm with the client, Jeanne gets dressed, tucks her shirt into her skirt, picks up a pair of scissors and stabs the man. With this downplayed climax, Akerman equates the banal and the domestic, the literal and the fictional, dressing and killing. "When she bangs the glass on the table and you think the milk might spill, that's as dramatic as the murder," stated Akerman. The film's last 7 minutes show Jeanne sitting at the dinner table, a flickering neon light striating her face. This unforgettable image of the character/the actress breathing, simply existing, resumes the filmmaker's contract of her character's desire for status. When it came out, Jeanne Dielman was fully in tune with the European women's movement. Peeling Potatoes was one of the articles in an issue of Les Temps Modernes edited by Simone de Beauvoir, and in Belgium the working rights of prostitutes were the subject of lively debate. The film's rigorous alignment of sexual/gender politics of a formal economy, showing cooking and hiding sex, was hailed by feminist critics as an impressive alternative to well-intentioned but conventional political documentaries and features, and many in the avant-garde felt vindicated that this narrative topically addressing women's issues was so plainly indebted to pure experiments of duration and series. Akerman's representation of a concrete, defamiliarized everyday was a defining feat. Despite their apparent simplicity, Akerman's assured framing and narrative, built out of blocks of real-time intercut by radical ellipses, are not easily replicated. Rather, the film's impact is indirectly evident in the emergence of a new phenomenological sensibility and approach to observation and the weight of time in the work of contemporary filmmakers as diverse as Abbas Kiarostami, Gus Van Sant, Pedro Costa, Apictopon Rerasafakul, Todd Haynes, Jia Janka, and Siming Liang. After Jeanne Dielman, Akerman has said, she felt she had to escape her own mastery to avoid repeating herself. In the 80s, as a natural outgrowth of her interest in the rhythm of gesture and dialogue, she turned to farces, musicals, and comedies as pretexts for more exuberant and fast-paced tempos. Tout une nuit, 1982, The 80s, 1983, I'm Hungry, I'm Cold, 1984, Window Shopping, 1986, Night and Day, 1991. Her unclassifiable narratives, News from Home and American Stories, Food, Family, and Philosophy, 1988. Lay a minor literary forms, Her Mother's Letters, Immigrant Letters, Jewish Jokes, over a redesigned Promised Land, New York. Still other films haunt us with their characters' opaque resistance to being possessed or pinned down. In two of her features, Les Rendezvous d'Anna, 1978, and La Captive, 2000, the female protagonists expressed their singularity by their amateur, out-of-tune singing. Across a wide range of modes and media, Akerman's remarkable gift lies in her work's elastic and transformative temporality. An overextended scene turns boredom into obstinate passion. Watched for long enough, her documentary landscapes yield uncanny feelings of déjà vu. Compressed and rhythmic, her language turns in on itself. Funny, musical, everyday gestures are redesigned, attaining a ceremonial, memorable intensity. We get a glimpse of the quality of Akerman's attentiveness and patience in Auteur de Jeanne Dielman, a behind-the-scenes video by actor Sammy Frey. Seyrig discusses her character's feelings of Akerman, who firmly insists she does not want a performance based on psychology. Brushing one's hair, making a meatloaf, and anxiety are all submitted to Akerman's detailed script and exacting vision. Small and precise movements are the norm. Mangold suggests the camera stay on the empty scene so that Jeanne's actions out of frame, going to check the time, placing something in the refrigerator, actually happen. Amid practical deliberations such as how many eggs go into a meatloaf, the secret of Akerman's timing is stunningly revealed in a simple rehearsal moment. Seyrig sits in profile by the kitchen table while Akerman, script and watch in hand, describes Jeanne's moves. Seyrig follows the directions. You wait for a minute, you stand up, go to the balcony, wait for 25 seconds, come back, pick up the broom and sit back down. You skim the stock and sit. Seyrig sits, mirroring her, elbow at the table. Akerman sits and waits. For the longest minute, the director lets Seyrig and Jeanne's time pass through her own body. It is this experience she relays to us, gently and surely.